This is Samah Fodeh here from the data mining lab. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine and the Yale School of Public Health. I'm also affiliated with the Veteran Administration. I was trained as a computer scientist. I work with patient data. When we say patient data, we have different data modalities. We have clinical text data, we have structured, and when I say structured data, I refer to labs and medications. We also work with imaging data for patients. And we also, as I just mentioned, I work in the lab with social media data, and particularly in using Twitter. I'm going to talk about some of the projects, the bigger projects that are running in the lab now. So I will start, of course, with COVID research. So with COVID, we wanted to understand the behavior of the public towards social distancing. And as we know, social distancing is the first mitigation sort of strategy that was used to combat COVID. So we wanted to understand how people understand it, actually, and comprehend it, and how they react to it. So we developed what we call a multifaceted social distancing measure, for which we try to find language in Twitter that addresses the purpose, which is like flatten the curve or slow the spread, or the implementation of social distancing, like closing businesses, for example, or closing schools, the adaptation, like working remotely, shopping online. So all of that we try to estimate from Twitter. We compose the dashboard that you can look at here. And I can't go through all the results, but I can show you here in this map that we were able to show that across the states, and this is particularly we looked at the data over the months of, like, starting January. We saw small circles in January, and each circle here represents the social distancing measure, and each slice represents the different facets. Here is the facets that we came up with. So here, for example, in March, the implementation passage in New York was the largest, and you remember March is where, we were hit badly in New York by COVID. Here, this is for California, and the green is the adaptation. You see every circle here has a component of adaptation, where the whole US sort of was experiencing the social distancing event. We also looked at the graph on Twitter, and we were able to estimate based on the retweets. Actually, our goal was to find the influence, or who are the main players in diffusing the corona-related tweets. We found that the president was occupying one big community with the White House, and the junior Donald Trump as members of his network. We also identified Speaker Pelosi, Hillary Clinton. We're talking here about the Democrats versus the Republicans in two different communities. We found the news groups, for example, they share similar contents related to COVID. So what is the goal of this project? I mean, the overall goal is to see whether Twitter predicts COVID cases or not. And this is like, we did the first part where we composed the social distancing measure, and right now we actually validated that there is a correlation. Here we are plotting the actual number of cases starting from February to June, and you see that there is actually, comparing to other models, predictive models of COVID cases, our model did best, but still we need to do more experimentation to validate this theory with more data from July and August. Still with COVID, I also want to measure the sentiment analysis towards different events related to COVID. For example, we did a small experiment trying to see how the public reacted towards COVID, who were influencing basically the public. Is it the media or the health government agencies? And we found that the normal users were, in terms of sentiment, whether being positive or negative towards towards corona, or the news that's coming out on, or the tweets that are coming on Twitter about corona, that the public are following more the media, or tweeting more about the content similar to what the media broadcasts rather than the health government agencies. So the sentiment of the public goes up when the news media tweets something that is positive. Similarly, it goes down following the sentiment of the tweets of the news media. So one of the things that we want to explore in the lab is the public sentiments towards COVID vaccine, and this is an open project right now. I want to look at the network and the graph of Twitter as well as the contents. We also want to look at persuasive events on Twitter, and this is a difficult question because it requires really, really big data to follow people over time and see their sentiments and see if they were influenced by certain players. And are those who are against vaccine actually, are they the same people who are against vaccines in general, or there is a new group that emerged as a group that opposes COVID vaccine? And the whole of this project basically is to do interventions, right? The public health personnel are interested in making sure that people do vaccinate, and interventions could be by identifying those areas or locations in the US or even internationally that are opposing, and try to put more, push more ads through the media or do something in that regard to sort of change opinions towards vaccine and for people to do vaccination. More with COVID, there is another project in which I try to combine multiple modalities of the data to predict COVID outcomes. The outcomes that we are looking at are the admission to hospital, intubation, and mortality. Of course, there are more specific outcomes that we can look at. But in this case, I want to look at the structured data. Again, it's the meds, the labs. And I want to look at the X-ray images for patients. I want to look at the clinical notes as well. And the clinical notes comes as a very important component because patients, when they are presented to the doctor, this is where they mention their symptoms. And symptoms in particular are not tabulated, meaning that they are buried in these narratives that are transcribed by the doctors. And the most important component of COVID, like the a question that was always related, to COVID is what are the symptoms? Every month, there is a new symptom that was emerging. So studying this problem is really important by looking at different types of modalities, and it helps physicians to take the best course of action or, determine what is the best level of care for patients. So this is again an open project, and I have a student who actually defended 2 weeks ago who explored how to combine using deep learning approaches, the images modality versus the text modality for cancer patients to predict those who have cancer versus not. So this is like a continuation of this project, and I'm looking for people to work with me on this. Moving a little bit from COVID, there is another project or two actually that I merged here together. So I want to look at or predict fatal health related outcomes using social media and the EHR. And why, and I'm focusing here on opioid overdose and suicide. And the question is why these in particular, and why social media could help the electronic health record or clinical data. The answer to this is that these particular events are behavioral events, and social media data, it contains all these thoughts and opinions, and I have shown that could be useful towards this. And if we combine these two data modalities together, we can learn more about such events. For example, if we learn more about patients' habits that they report over social media, and we know that people do because we did an experiment in the context of opioid overdose here, and I have submitted just the paper recently about people who are having an opioid use disorder issue on Twitter, and we were able to glean those patients and develop a predictive model that separated those who take the opioids for pain versus those who take them for recreational purposes versus, of course, the normal set of users on Twitter who just discusses opioid just because of interest. So we were able to see here, or we have shown the evidence that using Twitter data we can identify individuals who have addiction problems, a behavioral issue. We also have done an experiment studying personal traits of these individuals. And we have shown here, if you see this graph, that those who have opioid use issues or misuse, let me say, are more vulnerable, have a lack of emotional stability, are more lonely, and have neuroticism as a trait. So combining this information with the clinical data that resides in the EHR, electronic health records, I think we can do better and predict opioid overdose more accurately. And also in the context of suicide, we did an experiment on Twitter, and we were able to identify risk factors associated with suicide. So looking here, this is the group that has no risk of suicide. This is the group that is at risk of suicide. If you see here the language, so each circle, basically each color of the circle represents a different risk factor. And you can see here that there isn't really a distinguished pattern. But when we did the similar analysis here using network, we found that those who are at risk actually tweets more about depression, sleeping, cut myself, like it's the self-harm, which is one risk factor of suicide, and pills, which is like drug abuse could be, and substance abuse. Here we have alcohol and bullying. And in the literature, it has been proven that these risk factors are strongly associated with suicide. So we have shown here that using social media data, we can really learn a lot about the behaviors or the risk factors of these outcomes. And I'm looking also for students to go to the next step where we can combine both data modalities together using advanced machine learning approaches. This is another project in which we want to measure the patient-provider communication. And I'm looking particularly at patient-generated data. It seems like I'm more interested in that because in the electronic health record, like when you visit a doctor, the doctor usually the one who transcribes or documents your symptoms or what you complain to the doctor about. But there is a lot of information between you saying or being able to articulate what you are suffering from versus how the doctor interpret that, and then how the doctor goes down and in that limited amount of time document what you just said. But there is in the patient portal, which is another component of the electronic health record, there is an opportunity for the patient to communicate with their providers directly, and this is my chart. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. So I want to explore what are the types of communication that are happening here. We want to look at the types of information seeking, for example, information giving, empathy, decision making, and these are important because they are correlated with certain healthcare outcomes, like, for example, adherence to certain medications. I'm focusing on the cancer patients, particularly metastatic cancer patients, and I want to measure their adherence to oral therapies. So we did the experiment again. So like we did some work here, and we're planning to publish what we have identified, and we were able to show that there are, in the patient's messages to the doctors, there is questions about their lab results, their scans, like when are they happening, scheduling events. And then the providers, there are examples of information giving, like refills and detailed lab results. Using BERT here, we are plotting the contents of the embeddings of the communications that went between patients and providers. And here we can find that there are things related to prescriptions and meds, and here there is contents related to the site of cancer, whether it's thyroid, bone, breast, stuff like that. This is another project that's running at the VA, and in this project we want to define or identify or phenotype, let me say, different types of headaches, and there are different, as you know, migraine, cluster headache, sectional headache, post-traumatic headaches. So we want to use natural language processing and machine learning approaches to identify these patients. We again did some work in that direction, and looking at text data. See, the problem is that some patients go see their doctors, for example, in the context of migraine. They see doctors, they complain from headaches for a long time, and they are not yet given that diagnosis of migraine until years. My experiment has shown that 11% of the 2014 patients who were formally diagnosed with migraine in 2017 suffered 3 years before they are formally actually in the chart tagged as migraine patients, and 30% of 2015 patients suffered for 2 years. So here I think there is a lot of room for research to find trajectories of patients, how do they start, characterize them, and predict maybe the next type of headaches and how do these occur. Look at the order of headaches, like do we start with migraine and then go to sectional or cluster headaches. So there is a lot of research that can be done also using text data and using structured data in this project. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, again, I mean, I'm looking for students, and these are all fun projects to work on. Please contact me on my email, if you want to, or if you have any questions.